Welcome back to the RinkMasters Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Kroom. I'm joined with Chris Penner and Noah Jeter. How you guys doing today?
Oh, I'm pretty good. I mean, the Canucks, as of the recording today, just came off of 2 straight wins against the Maple Leafs, so that's always a good thing.
That's good. And without Pettersson.
Yes, that is a big thing, too. I mean, yeah, that was actually quite impressive. Proud of my Canucks.
Good stuff. How about you, Chris? How are you feeling?
Feeling not too bad. Still living the dream per usual. That doesn't change, regardless of situations. But we're doing good, and I'm looking forward to getting into this podcast.
Sounds great. I'm doing pretty good as well. I think I'm ready to get this going. I'm still a little upset with how the Dallas Stars game ended. They came back, pushed it to shootout, losing the shootout. So a little salty, but I think we're going to get on to our topic today, which will be general managers. We're going to be talking about, who we think's done a great job heading into this year and who we think could do better, who we think hasn't done good, and also talk about what we think the job of a GM is about. And if we were a general manager of an NHL team, what moves would we do and how would we build our team? Chris, I'm going to let you start this off.
I think GMs are an extremely important part of any organization. Obviously, they're ahead of that team, just like the head coach. They're really what they obviously put what's on paper onto the ice, right? So They're the ones who got to get the pieces and find the right pieces, obviously, to build that winning organization. And I feel like that's the biggest thing, is building that winning culture inside your organization. You could get all these star players and whatnot and throw them into a team, but if you don't have that winning culture in that team, you're not doing your part. That starts with your goaltending coach, your assistant coaches, your head coaches. They all got to gel together as a coaching staff. You got to put that together, but you also got to put together the right group of players to gel with each other and to gel with the coaching staff as well. So, they have a really tough job, but I think a lot of GMs do an absolutely phenomenal job at it.
Definitely.
Well, I was just going to add to that. I think another thing that people don't give them enough credit for is that they have to run everything, right? Pretty much they have the overview, and then in some organizations, obviously there's some higher positions, but in many organizations you have the GM and then you have the owners, right? Not all of them have presidents of hockey operations and all that stuff. And I mean, part of that too is they don't just have to trade for players, sign players from free agencies, do all the negotiations. They also have to manage all the scouting departments, right? They have to build the team through scouting. They have all that stuff. And some GMs are really strong at that. Others not so much. I mean, just looking at Vancouver, we've had an example that some people would argue one's good at one thing, one's good at the other. Benning's better at the drafting side of things, and Gillis was better at trades and free agency. So, I mean, you have those different responsibilities as GMs, and that's just a lot to handle. So, like Chris said, I think lots of them do that very well, and that's a lot of pressure to have to deal with on a daily basis.
No, for sure. It's a really interesting thing, right? Because also what I find too is general managers have typically a different mindset on how they want their team to look and how they want to build. Some want to build net out, some want to build front to back. It's very interesting. I know you look at the Montreal Canadiens, and that's what they did. Net out, they brought in Carey Price. They tried to build that defense, and then the last thing about their offense, and it definitely was an interesting way that worked. Chris, if you were a general manager, I mean, what would you do? How would you build your team, and what would your structure look like?
That's interesting because, the game's changed from, back in, say, the early 2000s, even we'll go into the 1990s to now. So, you obviously want skill and you need to play fast on your team, which is, I think, absolutely crucial. So honestly, I would build probably from the net out, but I need all my guys to be able to skate. You got to be able to skate to compete in this league. You can't be slow, and I think speed. But I think definitely I want to build that foundation in the goal crease and on defense, and then build my way up through the forward core for sure.
Absolutely.
Nice. Tyler, what about you? How would you do that?
See, I think your most important ticket is your goalie. You need to have a goalie that's going to stop the puck. So first and foremost, I'm starting with the net. I mean, I'm a little old school in this way. I like to have a bit of a big mobile defense. I want a defense that is going to be able to help the goalie out, that's going to eat the shots, and that's going to be able to get that clean pass out. You know, we're talking like guys like Shea Weber. I think I like having guys like Shea Weber on my team. And then, like Chris said, you need to have mobility and need to be fast. My forwards would need to be just that. I don't necessarily think I'd want all of the highly skilled forwards. Like, of course, I want to have your skilled forwards on that top line who can be the trigger men. You want your Patrick Laines, you want your Tyler Sagans, but at the end of the day, I want them to be able to skate, to compete, and I want to be able to roll all four lines without blinking. And that's how I'd want to build it. And I think Montreal's basically done that this year. You look at their offense, and they've been able to basically roll all four lines, and they're scoring goals and they're winning hockey games.
Yeah, I think in terms of how I'd build my roster, in terms of my top six, I'd want one to be a super heavy skill line, and then another line that can really eat minutes, grind out the tough puck battles, right? Like just go there against the other top lines, just still contribute a lot offensively, not in the traditional fourth line role of just, grind them out, just beat them to a pulp sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like they'd still have to have a considerable amount of skill, but they wouldn't be the line that would necessarily look as pretty doing it, if that makes sense, right? Like,
yeah,
I'd have one line, would just go there, just have the puck the entire time, right? Like, just make the other team look silly, and the other line just to match up against their top, just to take those minutes. Keep it positive, plus minus, score more goals than they score against you, pretty much, right? I think that's how I'd really build my top six. And then in terms of defense, highly mobile defensemen, along with defensemen who are also pretty smart. I don't think that you need to be as big as you used to be to have success on the back end. I mean, I think Quinn Hughes is a great example of that, right? And I think that you need players like Quinn Hughes, but you also need players more like Shea Weber, like Tyler said, right? You can just eat pucks. And then, I think a goalie who's highly mobile and who's really aware is also just incredibly important.
Well, yeah.
I was
just going to add on to that because, I mean, in today's NHL, you need to have possession, right? It's very possession driven. And so, that's a big thing I want to go for, right? So having, like you said, like those four lines that can all compete, that are fast and have a little bit of element of skill and grit, like that's the perfect balance in having the defense that's able to enforce that and help, balance out the offense, which is really good. But it's interesting to see because you go back in the older days, I mean, it was not possession at all, right? It was very much dump chase, dump chase, dump chase. So just, I think seeing the progression of the sport in that sense has been awesome to see.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't see it working out. I've watched a lot of teams, run dump and chase hockey, and it just seemed to have just gone out of the game so much quicker now because these defense are so quick at their breakouts in their own end, which is just so crucial in now today's games. You have to be able to have skill to bring that puck in, carry it in, and make plays, coming into the blue line to be able to be successful.
For sure.
Yeah, so kind of more bigger picture stuff again. So what would you guys say, like, in your minds as hockey fans, what is considered success as a general manager? Beyond simply just winning a cup, like what's considered success?
It's a very subjective thing, right? Because, for some people, they're going to say it's winning a Stanley Cup, right? Or at least having those appearances. For some, it's just being a consistent, playoff team that's in the conversation every year. And I think that's where I would tend to lie. Where you're consistently in that conversation, no matter what state your team's in, you're bringing in a balance of youth and you have that veteran core, and that you're able to kind of just sustain a certain level of expectations year in, year out. Consistency is key. I think that would, in my opinion, that's a successful general manager. Whereas, I mean, some people will probably say it's winning a Stanley Cup.
Yeah, Chris, want to add to that at all?
I think for me, being a GM is always having a plan in place. I think that's always to be successful. whether your team's in, that win now state or whether they are rebuilding. I think you always have to have a plan as a GM.
Mm-hmm.
And with that plan, I say for it to be successful is if you're successfully moving that plan more and more towards winning that Stanley Cup. So I think always having that plan in place, always being, consistent with that and making strides into that right direction is really big for me. And if you're doing that and you're showing your fans and you're showing everyone in that organization that you're progressively doing that year in and year out, I think that's a successful GM. Because you obviously can't control what goes on the ice with the players. You can only put out the players that are out there. But I think as long as your plan's being successful, moving towards the right direction of winning a cup, I think that's successful for me at least.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the biggest things that can be used to help kind of, judge their level of success and in a way is the level of communication and the trust within the organization, right? So you need to be able to communicate your plan, right? To fans, to the people in the organization, right? Like having the plan's all great, but it doesn't matter if you can't communicate that, right? And if you can't build that trust, if there isn't that success behind the scenes in an organization, I think that's a good way that you can help judge the success, and in my opinion anyway, is that level of communication. And I think many of the GMs right now that are kind of on the hot seat, including Jim Benning, many would argue that his communication hasn't been great the last few years. Whether or not that's entirely his fault, we'll talk about that later, actually, in our discussion here. So yeah, kind of we talked a bit about success. What would you say is a failure as a GM? Like, what constitutes being fired?
Yeah, Tyler, you can go ahead on this one.
Sure. I think the number one thing is and this is kind of going off of what Chris was saying, what makes a successful GM is you have a lack of a plan, lack of vision, and you're mismanaging your assets. I think we're seeing that in Nashville right now, actually. But mismanaging your assets is a big deal, especially when you don't have a plan, because what you're going to end up doing in that case is, you're going to say, you're trying to contend, you're overspending. The next thing you know, you can't. Well, the guy that comes in to clean up your mess is going to be put completely behind the eight ball. We kind of saw that with Gillis in Vancouver, and that's what Benning had to come in and clean up. So I think that's big for me. If you're not consistent, you don't have vision, and you're mismanaging your assets, and there's that lack of communication with your staff, that's a big no-no. It's not going to work.
Oh, I totally agree. I think, management assets key for a GM, as you said. I think another thing with management asset is management asset at the draft.
Yeah.
I think you got to be able to draft. And I think that all starts with, obviously getting your scouts in line. And as Noah alluded to, is that communication, is having that good communication between, you and your scouts, and, having that constant talk about, okay, this is a player I like, this is a player I don't like, and having that constant communication as well. Because if you can't draft well, you're putting all your success into your franchise, into making trades, into free agency. And I think you need all three of those things, including making the draft picks, to be successful. So if you can't consistently have those three things rolling for your franchise, I think that's a failure. And I think you nailed it on the head with Nashville, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, actually, I think those are awesome, guys. Like, I agree with those completely. And I think Nashville is a great example because, in my mind, they've gotten to a point where they don't also have an organizational identity. And I think that's also kind of a point where you have to fire a GM is what's your identity? If the GM can't answer that, if the front office can't answer that, right? If they don't know where they're heading as a team, if they don't know what their identity is, that's as Tyler words a big no.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's not good. And I see that in Nashville right now. They don't know what they are.
And see, I might be wrong by this, but I'm not sure if I am. that identity left when Mike Fisher retired.
I think he was dragging that team. I think part of the thing was that when he left, they lost that leadership up front that kind of sheltered how weak that team was up front. If that makes sense, right? Like, I think that he was kind of like that rallying point that just hit it just enough. Like, I think everybody knew that they were defense heavy still, but it wasn't that their offense was incompetent. But now I think that's just clear that they're incompetent up front.
Well, Mike Fisher was the passion behind that wagon. He was able to really get that team rolling. Post Mike Fisher, they haven't found that one bit. And I think, as a GM, you got to find a guy to replace that. And, the GM hasn't been able to do that at all.
Yep. All right.
I think another thing is, sorry, before you go into that, sorry. I think another thing when you look at Nashville is, as a GM, I think you need to be able to go to your team and tell them, I need you guys to buy into this system, and I need you guys to buy in to the direction that we're going into. Mm-hmm. And what can you, as say the Nashville GM, go into that locker room and say, all right, I need you guys to buy into this. Like, what is there to buy into? There's nothing, right? And I think that, makes a unsuccessful GM is not being able to go to your team and saying, this is what we're going to buy into, because there's nothing there.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's best summed up in their perpetual search for a number one center.
Yeah.
What's that been the last 10 years of the franchise? They've been looking for a number one center. So yeah, I think that just sums it up.
It's easy summed up to the point that no matter who they bring in, it doesn't work out. They thought it was going to happen with Ryan Johansson, didn't work out. They thought that was going to be the case with bringing in Matt Duchene. That certainly hasn't worked out. So yeah, no, it's there's an organizational issue that needs to be fixed.
All right, guys. So now let's kind of move into our lists. All right. So this is the fun part, in my opinion. So Tyler and Chris, who are your top 3 underrated GMs right now? Who do you think is doing a good job but isn't getting enough credit for it?
I'm going to go Minnesota's GM to start. I don't remember his name, but I think he's done an excellent job with. Yeah, I think he's done an absolutely fantastic job with that team. Sorry, and he's put a lot of pieces together that I don't think a lot of people realize. How actually good those pieces really are, especially up front when you look at the Wild, Kevin Fiala, Kaprizov, Joel Eriksson-Ek, Jordan Greenway. Those guys, at least up front, I think he's done an excellent job putting those guys together and having supporting pieces for those guys as well.
Oh, for sure.
We can kind of go just rotate through it if you guys would like. So
I want to say I can't remember the Finnish GM in Columbus. I can't remember his name, but I think he's done a really good job with Columbus this year. Of course,
pull it up for you. Jarmo Kekalainen.
Right, Kekalainen. Yeah, I think he's done a really good job. Of course, that was that big trade where they traded Pierre-Luc Dubois for Laine and Roslovic. That trade's worked out really well. And I think he's really done a good job at, putting the right pieces in place to complement Tortorella's system while keeping the team, I would say, a relatively competitive team when people just kind of always think they're not going to be that competitive. And that team always seems to be performing above expectations under the leadership of Kirkainen.
All right. So for me, Don Waddell in Carolina. I mean, that team's really they've been getting better and better. I mean, obviously this year, some of their players haven't been quite as good as hoped, but I mean, they're putting together competitive teams. We talked about Nashville. They don't seem to have an identity. I think Carolina absolutely does. I think the players are very strong locker room, and yeah, they've made some good trades, good moves, and honestly, I think that he isn't getting enough credit.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think I'll go for another good one. Is the New York Islanders with their GM. I think he's done a very good job. He's put together a team that has an identity. They have an identity of being a strong defensive team, but he's also put those pieces together where they have they still have some skill forwards, and they have every single one of those players, is able to compete each and every night. And I think he really has a good, strong team there in New York, and they're at the top of their division right now as a result of that.
Hit Tyler.
Man, I'm having a time finding another underrated one because I really feel like those were the underrated general managers that could truly be labeled underrated in terms of what was expected for their teams.
I have another one. All right. Rob Blake in LA.
Yeah.
I guess you could say Rob Blake.
They have a good project there. What was that? They went 6 games, went on a 6-game winning streak just recently, right? Like,
they've looked good doing it.
Well, yeah, and they have lots of young prospects. I think arguably the deepest prospect pool in the league, and I mean, yeah, they're looking good right now. So,
yeah, no, their prospect pool is definitely up there.
Yep. Then my last one, I have 2 that are kind of like they're not really underrated, but they're more just like I don't think they're appreciated enough. Obviously, I have Kyle Dubas on there actually. Like I think that the team is looking really good. I think they have gotten kind of unlucky actually in the playoffs. And I don't think that's on him.
Mm.
I mean, he's been there now since May 11th, 2018. This will be almost 3 years here coming up. So, I mean, I think that this team is pretty good, and I think he's actually done a better job than lots of people give him credit for. And then also, I think that Jim Benning gets way more hate than he deserves. Frankly, like I think that especially because he was appointed in 2014, right?
Yeah,
and at that point, the Canucks still had the Sedins. Right, that was still the Sedin era. They still had lots of those guys, and they were still hoping to be able to compete. Right, so I think that lots of Canucks fans have kind of forgotten that context, and they're just like, "Well, he's been here now for 7 years. Where's the product on the ice?" Right, like I think that that's forgotten, and I think that because of that, he's gotten some unfair hate.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's a fair point. Do we want to move into some of our GMs who we think are doing a bad job so far with their team right now, and we think are on the hot seat?
Okay, so I have 2 categories actually for this. So I have who do we think is overrated? Not necessarily that they should be fired, but that they're just like held in a bit too high esteem. And then I also have who should be fired. So like there's a bit different there. So yeah, which one do we want to start with? Do we want to start with just who's overrated?
We can go with that to start. Yeah, that works with me.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, let's hop right in.
All right. You want to tee us off, Chris?
Yeah, I'll tee us off. Sure, why not? I ain't gonna talk about Nashville. I think we've done enough bashing on them, unless one of you guys got that planned out. Let's look at the New York Rangers. Let's look at their team right now. Once again, I don't know GM's names very well, but they've had back-to-back.
And oh wait, are you talking about the Rangers? Sorry.
Yeah, the Rangers.
That's Jeff Gorton.
Okay. So I think with him, I think he's put together an organization who's gotten 2, high picks back-to-back years. Lafreniere, Cackle. And I'm going to give him time for right now to see what he can put together around those players. But as of right now with the Rangers, I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing what their buy-in for their players and coaching staff would be right now. I don't see it. I know they've had a lot of issues, Tony DeAngelo, Artemi Panarin, which are, those are big situations because those are 2 big players on the team. But I think as of right now, I would say he's a little overrated, not on the hot seat because I think he still has time with those two young players coming up. But I definitely like to see more out of him and with the Rangers.
I was going to say actually about Jeff Gorton. People say that Jim Benning's felt like he's been around for forever. Jeff Gorton has only been in New York a year less than Benning.
Oh wow.
So I think that's worth noting here, right? I think that the Rangers brand right now, just in general, is a little overhyped. I think it's a little overrated. So
Yeah, no, for sure.
All right, Noah, who do you have?
I have Doug Wilson in San Jose.
I mean, is he really overrated though? Like, or
I
is
think
he?
he's overrated by the organization. He's been there since 2003. It's almost been 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's the same conversation as Poyle and.
So
Nashville.
outside of that, fine. Like, ignoring that, I think that you can make an argument that Brian McClellan in Washington, I think that team was dragged by like yes, they did have some great players, but I don't think they're as strong of a team as their star players would suggest they are. I don't know. It's a tricky conversation because lots of those GMs, I think, in terms of the most clear one that I would argue is maybe Lou Lamoriello in New York Islanders, just on the basis that he's already been there for a few years. And the thing that he's done well is a winning mentality. They have a very clear identity. In terms of the actual roster building, like, they have some really bad contracts there that are just eating them up. They've had to lose some good players, and I think that's kind of a bit of a blade on that. Like, I don't think he necessarily deserved general manager of the year last year.
Fair enough.
That's my opinion on Lou Lamoriello. Like, yes, he's a good GM, but I don't think that he deserved general manager of the year last year.
I mean, you make a fair point in that because Barry Trotz coached the heck out of that team.
Well, that's what I'm saying, right? Like, it wasn't that great on paper.
And I'm not sure without Trotz behind the bench that team would make it to the conference finals.
Yep.
But yet again, he did put that piece in place, knowing that might help his team too. So
that's true.
I think you look at that from both ways, but I agree and I disagree on that part. But
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. If you want, we can just jump to who's on the hot seat, if that's a bit easier.
I mean, we could.
Who do you have, Tyler? Who do you have on the hot seat?
In my perfect world, who I would have on the hot seat, man. I mean, obviously, Poyle in Nashville. I think that's who it's got to be, just given the fact that team is completely. They don't have an identity more, as you said, and he seems to be trying to make that push, and he's just kind of. There's no direction there, and I think if you're Nashville, you can't afford to not have a direction, and I think that that he should be canned. Absolutely.
Can I interject here? I think that Marc Bergevin is on the hot seat too. I think that.
Really?
No, I do. I think that he's right near the breaking point with that team. Like, they've had a really rough stretch here after a great start to the season. And I think firing Claude Julien, like, I don't know. I think that's kind of like now this is it for Bergevin.
I mean,
if you know what I mean, I think that's kind of just where they're at now as a franchise.
I see the angle you're getting at, but here's where I think he's safe. Look at how Tyler Toffoli is performing on that bargain of a contract in Montreal. And I also say, look how well Jake Allen is panning out. Romanov. Take a look at that trade, Domi for Anderson. They're already winning that trade, right? So, like, I think he's done more than enough to save his butt for this year. And currently the team is performing better under Ducharme now. The team is chugging along. So I don't know if I'd say he's on the hot seat this year. I mean, if this completely blows up, then sure, but so far it doesn't appear that way.
Yeah, I'd say Bergevin's definitely safe in Montreal for the season, and I think let's give him next season too to really see what he can have with Ducharme working a full season with Montreal, because it's obviously tough coming into this type of a season.
Yep.
Yeah.
I have two other ones that come to mind. If you don't mind me sharing them, unless you guys have any other guys right away.
Go for it, man.
Bob Murray in Anaheim, and then I mean, I know it was just a change, but Kevin Adams in Buffalo. I don't know what's wrong in Buffalo, but I don't know, guys. I don't know what's going on there. Like, I think a GM at any point's in the hot seat, and that's why I throw Kevin Adams in there. Yes, he was just appointed over the summer, but it's also just the team's so underperformed this year. Like,
I don't think you can blame it on Adams.
Well, that's what I'm saying though. But that's what I'm saying. It's questionable. But you're a GM in Buffalo, and your team's underperforming so badly. I think you're just always in the hot seat.
The culture in Buffalo is very bad. I mean, this culture's been there for a couple decades now.
Yeah.
And the way I see it, things in Buffalo aren't going to change unless the ownership changes. I think that's where the problems stem from. And as long as the current ownership's running the team and has their hands in things, Buffalo is going to continue to be a very underwhelming franchise.
Mm-hmm. And then in terms of Bob Murray, that their forward group is old and just over the hill at this point, right? Like, I don't know. I just think that team is not equipped well enough to compete right now.
I mean,
I don't know if you guys...
they are in that rebuild stage, right? Because I mean, they had that long time, playoff contending team under Perry and Getzlaf. Like, really, they only fell off in the last 3 years. I feel like he's put some decent young pieces in place, right? So I don't know if he's necessarily on the hot seat, but we'll see where they go after this year. Because personally, I think the problem comes down to the coach, and at the same time, Murray put the coach in, so we'll see what happens, but nobody really did expect them to be that good this year.
Yeah, I was going to say, sorry, an easy cop-out answer for who's on the hot seat is obviously Jim Benning.
By popular Twitter mob opinion.
Yeah, but do I think he's really that on the hot seat? I don't think so.
No, and I mean, Aquilini has said on Twitter that they're not planning on getting rid of Benning anytime soon, right? So, I mean, we'll see how things play out. I think, first of all, most Canucks fans are over dramatic in the first place, and I do think they made a bigger problem out of what's actually currently going on in Vancouver. I think that's just been a big dumpster fire from the beginning on Twitter with Canucks fans.
Okay, so I have to ask you guys, as fans of Calgary and Dallas respectively, what are your thoughts on Treliving and Nil? Do you think... I don't know, I think that it's an interesting conversation. We only have a few minutes here, so I don't know.
I think Nil's done a pretty good job. The young players that he's drafted that are playing this year are looking really good. Jason Robertson and Ty Dellandrea have fit into the roster perfectly. There's been some injuries and some setbacks for Dallas early on this year, and I think the team overall has played relatively good. I think Nil's done a pretty good job with this team. We have a good balance of vets and younger players on the roster, which is what you always want. So I think it's safe to say his job is safe for the foreseeable future.
Chris?
Yeah. And I think going into Brad Treliving, I think this is his last kick at the can here. We obviously know what happened. Jeff Ward was gone. That was the inevitable. It was going to happen.
Yeah.
So bringing in Daryl Sutter, I think this is his last kick. If Daryl Sutter works under this Calgary Flames team, Brad Treliving is safe because they have Sutter signed for 3 years. Mm-hmm. So if that doesn't work, Trillian's got to go and they got to shake the core up. Because then we know it's a core issue with the Flames. And we know that Brad Trillian has not put together the right pieces in that right core for that team to win. I think it's as simple as that. So I think if Daryl Sutter gets the job done, doesn't necessarily have to be this season, but if next year or the year after they can't get the job done, then yeah, he's gone.
Yeah.
But I think Daryl Sutter is his last big move for this team for right now.
I was actually going to, in terms of Brad Treliving, he's actually been in Calgary longer than Benning's been with the Canucks by a few weeks. So it's pretty tight, but it's around the same timeline, which makes this so much more interesting in between Benning and Treliving here. I was going to say, in terms of this last offseason, though, the signing of Markstrom, I was just looking at stats. This was yesterday, so Saturday that I was looking at this. Thatcher Demko, in the same amount of games this year as Markstrom, has a slightly higher goals against average, but a better save percentage than Jacob Markstrom this year.
Oh.
And the difference in salary isn't even close. So I don't know, guys. I think that's just pretty interesting food for thought there. And then my last thing was a surprise, but we're just about out of time. I was just going to say Bill Zito has had a bit of a weird time. He was disappointed in September, but one of his first things was calling out Keith Yandel. So that's a bit of a weird start.
And he's a big reason as to why Florida's been as successful as they have.
Well, that's just it, though, right? Like he's had a kind of a weird start. It's been just surprises at every turn. But yeah, so that wraps up our discussion on general manager. So Tyler, why don't you take us out?
All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. Please remember to like and subscribe, and also share our episodes with your friends and family. And we hope to see you here next week.